Good morning, everyone. Thank you, Adam. Great to be back after being sick. Thanks, Adam, for covering, and I hope you all enjoyed the treat last week with him. I am mostly better, but still may have a cough here and there, so I'll try to dodge the mic as best as possible, so we'll see. We are covering the second half of chapter 3 of 1 John this morning, which is all about love, so that'll be fun to dive into that together this morning. Before we begin, let's have a word of prayer. Our great God and our Father, we are so grateful to be here together again this morning with you and with each other. And Lord, we pray that we would make the most of our time in our classes in such a way that you would be glorified and we would encourage one another. We pray that you would bless us and be with us this hour. It's in your Son's name. Amen. Alrighty, so as a quick review of last week, I tuned into Adam's class and picked up a few things, and then just in my studies as well, some things that I wanted to hit again as we get back into chapter 3. But the way I summarized the first half of chapter 3 is he's been talking a lot about just whose children we are. He compares these two, these two classes of people in a sense of you're either a child of God or you're a child of the devil. And we have a choice of whose child that we would like to be. So he talks a lot at the beginning of chapter 3 about having confidence as his child, and the ability that it grants us to not have shame before him, that we can not shrink back, as he says there at the end of chapter 2. But then he contrasts that with this big discussion about lawlessness, which I think Adam talked about a lot last week. Talked about how we often associate lawlessness with this idea of anarchy and chaos and, absolute evil. But in reality, lawlessness is, or at least can be, much simpler, much quieter than that here in this text. So I have to be careful to not make a practice. He talks a lot about that in this, what we practice. Practicing righteousness or practicing lawlessness. You see that hit on several times. And that is what causes us to become children of the devil or children of righteousness or children of God. So now getting into this second half of chapter 3, he's going to contrast this lawlessness and lovelessness with the love that we find in Christ through abiding in him. Let's just read now just the second half of chapter 3, starting in verse 11, and then I'll give you a minute to reflect on that. Alrighty. For this is the message that you have heard from the beginning, that we should love one another. We should not be like Cain, who was of the evil one and murdered his brother. And why did he murder him? Because his own deeds were evil and his brother's righteous. Do not be surprised, brothers, that the world hates you. We know that we have passed out of death and into life because we love the brothers. Whoever does not love abides in death. Everyone who hates his brother is a murderer, and you know that no murderer has eternal life abiding in him. By this we know love, that he laid down his life for us, and we ought to lay down our lives for the brothers. But if anyone has the world's goods and sees his brother in need, yet closes his heart against him, how does God's love abide in him? Little children, let us not love in word or talk, but in deed and in truth. By this we shall know that we are of the truth, and reassure our heart before him. For whenever our heart condemns us, God is greater than our heart, and he knows everything. Beloved, if our heart does not condemn us, we have confidence before God. And whatever we ask, we receive from him, because we keep his commandments and do what pleases him. And this is his commandment, that we believe in the name of his Son, Jesus Christ, and love one another, just as he has commanded us. Whoever keeps his commandments abides in God, and God in him. And by this we know that he abides in us, by the Spirit whom he has given us. All right, just take a couple minutes here to consider and make some notes for yourself. All right, so what are your kind of big first impressions or maybe summarizing verses that you see in this section? Big ideas. Yeah.
I feel like there's a progression. So it starts off with saying, love one another. This is the commandment from the beginning. But then there's kind of a progression of like a litmus test almost. Like, what does that look like?
Yeah.
And how can we know we're doing it?
Yeah.
And so it's like, this is the example Jesus gave us, and that's how we know love. Mm-hmm. And then we know that we're of the truth when we're doing those things.
Yeah, totally. So, yeah, that's a great point out that there's kind of a progression here and a kind of a test that to see if we have this reassurance and we are of the truth if we love like this. So, yeah, great. Yeah, Micah.
There seems to be a lot of connection here between love and death. So
Love and death?
Love and death,
Yeah.
So there's, in verses 11 and 12, tells us of love, which you've heard from the beginning, and then it compares the opposite of the way it looks like not to love to Cain.
Yeah.
So it says Cain was a murderer. So if you don't love your brother, which it says down in verse 15, that if you don't love your brother or you hate your brother, you are a murderer, just like Cain. So it's a contrast there. Like you either love your brother or you're a murderer who has no place in the eternal kingdom.
Yeah.
And also in verse, get my verses here, where it says that Christ laid down his life for us, which is love.
Yeah.
In verse 16, also again connecting to that we should give up our lives for one another, which is love.
Yeah.
Whether that's physically give up or sacrificing our life for our brethren. So it's that contrast and comparison or connection that's just love and death.
Yeah, definitely. I love that sort of play on ideas where instead of being a murderer, Christ instead lays down his life and gives it up in that way. But yeah, pretty strong language there about whoever hates his brother is a murderer. So that's, yeah, we'll get into that as well. But yeah, a lot of comparisons between life and death, love and hatred that he's playing off of ideas that he's already been working on. A lot of repeated ideas here is kind of, we're starting to see some kind of re-emphasis of what he's already said and kind of restating in a slightly different way of things that he's already said. So we'll get into that as well. Any other big ideas here that you wanted to point out? Yeah.
One thing that sticks out to me is that with the example of Cain, the world treats hate as a way to solve a problem. You know, Cain felt like he solved his problem by killing his brother, but in fact, love is what solves the true problem.
Yeah.
And even the contrast between Christ laid down his life, even though the world felt like they took it from him through hate, he actually laid it down in love, which solved the problem.
Yeah.
If they had murdered him, it wouldn't have solved the problem.
Yeah, I love that. There's a big problem to be solved, and clearly hate and murder is not the answer as he lays out here. Yeah.
Something sticks out to me is that hate aligns actively murdering someone like Cain did to be as bad as, or we can be guilty of the same thing by being passive, by not doing something.
Yeah.
And he closes this section by saying that we hate our brethren when we don't meet their needs.
Yeah.
If we just ignore that, that's passive hatred. And that's an interesting concept.
Definitely going to talk about that as well. There's similar to, I think, how we talked about lawlessness last week, as we associate lawlessness with this, anarchy and chaos. I think in the same way we associate hatred with some very specific things, but this is a little bit different picture of hatred than maybe we typically think. Great. All right, let's get into some more detail here than just the first handful of verses through verse 15. So these first few, about 11 through 13, reflect a lot of what he has already said. He kind of re-emphasizes them. He talks about in verse 11 this message that you've heard from the beginning, which reflects what he's already talked about when he says, this old and new commandment back in chapter 2, which is to love one another. So he's hitting this again hard here. Verse 12, when he talks about Cain being born of the devil, he's playing off of what he just talked about in chapter 3, being children of the devil. Whose child are you? Who are you born of? And then when he says in verse 13, do not be surprised when the world hates you, he's already said that before back at the beginning of chapter 3 as well, where he says, don't be surprised. The world does not know you because it did not know him. So there's all these ideas that he's reiterating and re-emphasizing to make his point. And we'll talk a little bit about that in a minute, about this kind of cycle of thought that he goes through. But one thing I really found interesting in verse 14, kind of this new thought where he equates loving our brothers with passing out of death and into life, where he basically says exactly that. In verse 14, we know that we have passed out of death and into life because we love the brothers. So what does that mean? I had to kind of chew on that for a minute. What are your thoughts on that? What does it mean when he says we have passed out of death and into life because we love? Yeah.
That when we have not entered into the righteousness side of the life side of this equation, what we are tempted to be filled with is hatred and anger and all these negative feelings towards our brothers. And he's creating identity sections here.
Yeah.
How would you identify someone who's a child of the devil? How would you identify someone who's a child of righteousness? And this is one of those identity statements, essentially saying if you are still filled with hatred, well, you can't be part of the light if you're filled with hatred. So you can use that either way.
Yeah.
When I've relinquished hatred for my brother and anger towards my brother, that is a likely sign that I have become of the light. If I am leaning back into hatred, anger, and those emotions, probably have something I need to go check on where I'm identifying on that spectrum between child of devil, child of righteousness.
Yeah. Yeah, it is. This is kind of an identity statement. Saw somebody else? Yeah.
I don't think it's saying this, but it's almost to the point where you're saving your soul. If your soul doesn't have love, you're going to die and you're going to hell. And that's the death, the second death.
Yeah.
It could be saying that, but I'm not for sure that it is. But and if you love your brother, you're going to save your life, which pass on and do what God's will and go to heaven.
Yeah. I think that absolutely hits on it pretty directly. I think he is saying that in a way where he talks about, says it pretty clearly in verse 15 as well. You know that no murderer has eternal life abiding in him. So Yeah, this idea of passing out of death and into life. It's like Adam said, it's kind of a litmus test of where you're at and where your soul is placed. Is it in a, are you heading towards life or are you heading towards death? And this is how we know if we love our brothers. Any other thoughts? I think I saw. Yeah.
It's just that this is John, who in his gospel tells the story about Nicodemus and being told that he has to be born again.
Yeah.
And this is that concept. It's natural for us to go from being born and living our life and dying. We're all going to die. It's unnatural to go from death to life. Mm-hmm. And so it's a sign that we've been born again.
Yeah.
That we show love like Jesus showed to us by giving us life.
Yeah. Yeah, I love that. This is a picture of being born again, not of this world, of course, just as he says to Nicodemus. It's an evidence, in a sense, of spiritual rebirth, of a new life, a Christ-like spirit within us, which is fitting then that he starts talking about, the example of Christ here in just a minute. So moving on from that, so again, he contrasts this life and rebirth in verse 15 with this hatred and death and murder, no eternal life. I love that how he says it in verse 13 where he says, don't be surprised if you're hated for this. We should not be surprised when there's hatred from the world, but I think the implication is that we should be surprised if there is hatred among our brothers. He's like, hatred only comes from one place, and that is the world. Hatred has no place among the brotherhood. Getting into this idea of hatred, as we touched on just a minute ago, kind of similar to our discussion about lawlessness, what behaviors do we associate with hatred? What do we normally think of when we think of hatred? Yeah.
I mean, we have this expression of like, oh, well, they're dead to me. And the implication is like, I've deserted them.
Yeah.
And for whatever reason, you justify that they can be dead to you because of what they did. But I think that's maybe the contrast is like, if we're in a time of need, the world deserts us, whereas God actively does not.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there's a sense of complete, like, oh, I hate you, I'm going to shut you out of my life. Yeah. What else? If you hate someone, what do you feel? Yeah.
You're usually jealous because they have something that you want.
Okay.
And you can't get it, so you're jealous of them.
Yeah, maybe so. Maybe some jealousy.
There's some anger, usually.
Yeah.
There's a hatred. They don't agree with what they've done, or you don't agree with what they stand for, or they are doing something that goes against what you believe, or have done something to you. It's usually that. It's usually a personal thing, and that's what you think.
Yeah, you can't stand the choices they've made, the person they are, everything that they stand for. It just makes you angry, just makes you sick to your stomach. There's a lot of violence. When you think of hatred, you think of violence and aggression, hurtful words spoken. You hate their choices that they make. In the same way that lawlessness is quieter than that, or it can be, I think hatred may also not be as actively nasty as we often think. It can be passive. It can be sneaky. It can be quiet. I think that we see here. We can hate each other all day long by simply treating someone as if, like Arrow said, if they're just dead to you, if they are, we can think so little of each other that we effectively hate each other. And I've seen that in churches in the past, Christians that call each other brothers that think so little of each other to the point where it's hatred. And they say that they love, but in reality, they couldn't care less about each other. Yeah.
It's also sneaky in the fact that you can smile and shake their hand, but the minute that you turn your back, you immediately start complaining to somebody else about how much you hate them.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, there's a lot of backbiting here. That's kind of the quiet, sneaky part, is that sort of gossip or hurtful words spoken. Yeah.
Sometimes it starts as you have no regard for them. You don't view them as respectable. You don't care really about how they feel, what they're doing. You just have apathy towards them. And then I think it does progress into violence because then they start getting on the nerves.
Yeah, then it turns into like passive aggression and like little jabs and things like that. Yeah.
When you said passive and Mara said apathy, the whole language of this is it's either or.
Yeah.
There's no middle ground. There's no place for those. You are either love or you're.
Yeah.
There's no gray.
Right. And that's what's so scary about it in a way, is if that's where our heart is at towards our brothers, then just like he said, you know that you have, well, I guess the opposite, passed out of life and into death. There's no life if that's how your heart is towards your brothers. Thank you.
And not just our brothers, too. It can be the world. I've seen a saying on Facebook that says, be careful who you hate. It might be those you love. Mm-hmm. And I think the world looks at us like, oh, we hate sinners. And, we even have a saying that, oh, I love the sinner, but I hate the sin.
Right.
And they see us as haters when that should be farthest from the truth. We should still, we do hate that they're in sin.
Yeah.
But we still should show love. And I know that, it's a fine line.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so it is. It's such a delicate balance to be struck of wanting what's best for them and best for their soul, while at the same time, not accepting and not, kind of placating that behavior. Yeah, Belinda.
I think most of the time we see the more subtle ways
definitely
of doing this. But I think we're kidding ourselves if we think that does not, if we don't get that under control, it escalates. Yeah. And it becomes more physically aggressive. I have been in situations, I can remember in one church, people wouldn't come in and sit. They wouldn't sit on the same bench with somebody else. And if the other person came in and sat down on the end of the bench they were at, they would literally get up and move across the building. I've seen that. I've also seen where people serving the Lord's Supper, men serving the Lord's Supper, would not serve it. They would not serve it. They made a big deal about not serving it. It ended up splitting the church over it because of a person's race. They wouldn't serve it to them. They were Christians, but they wouldn't do it. They just skip them and go on.
Wow.
Those are things, now that's just a couple of things that I personally have been involved in, but I don't know about. But that happens, and that's in the Lord's body. So we don't need to think, it's okay because we're kind of keeping it in this passive-aggressive kind of situation. Mm-hmm. No, if we don't work on it, that's where it escalates.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, Adam.
I think some of this discussion, to what Peggy said, the need to choose or acknowledge that you have chosen either hatred or life. And I think that's part of why he gives these definitions of love. That when he starts saying, like, if you love someone, you'll sacrifice yourself for them. Because, again, I think we may act like there's three choices. There's hatred on one, there's love on the other, and there's just ambivalence, tolerance, or I'm just in the middle. Like I don't hate them, but I don't know that I love them. That's not me crazy.
Yeah.
But I think that's part of why he gives these really stark definitions of love to say to probe and say, are we treating others with love? Are we treating them sacrificially? Because if the answer is no, then we are treating them with hatred.
Yeah.
And so it's a little easier maybe for us to think in those terms, partly because it's positive,
Yeah.
of inspecting, do we hate our brethren? Of course I don't hate them. Do we hate the world? Of course I don't hate them. Okay, I'll ask the opposite question.
Yeah.
Are you sacrificing for them? Because if the answer to that is no, this text would tell us we are more likely on the spectrum side of hate.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, I love that. There's no in between. There's either we love them like Christ loved them, and that's the picture that we see. Is this is the love that I'm talking about here in verse 16 in just a minute. Do you love them like Christ loved them? If not, you hate them. That's the idea here. So pretty strong language. I mean, pretty strong feelings that this indicates here. Did want to point out something I just thought was interesting, kind of as an aside of the big picture here. Notice that there's this kind of cycle train of thought that he's having, which I feel has to be intentional, where he starts with this message of love and then reemphasizes it here, and then he's going to hit it again in chapter 4, kind of the second half of chapter 4. But then sandwiched in between, he talks about false teachers every time. He talks about love, and then he talks about false teachers, and then he talks about love, and then false teachers again. So it's just interesting, that idea. What are some implications of that, I think, that maybe you can draw from this cycle of thought? Just as far as like the big picture of the message of that. Yeah.
It's something you can't ignore. You must love and you must watch out for the teachers. You have to be ready and you have to condition yourselves to know who you should love and who you should resist. Both ways.
Yeah. Yeah. One is, they're both critically important for sure. So that's definitely part of it. Yeah, Josh.
It's telling me that since he's mentioning love and false teachers in this pattern, the false teachers are kind of skewing in mind of what love is and what hate is. And so John has to go through and be like, no, love is this, hate is this, false teachers are this. And it's like, oh, okay.
Yeah, great. So yeah, I think that's a big part of it, where he is kind of setting the record straight about what's what. And like, okay, there's a lot of ideas floating around with these false teachers and who Jesus was and who he wasn't. And, there's an indication here several times of, they're teaching things that are kind of loosey-goosey if they're moral or not. And he's like, no, this is what it is. This is what love is. This is what hate is. This is what right and wrong is. Yeah, great. There's definitely a picture there of that. Anything else? Yeah.
One, that Jesus is the definition of love, and false teachers are not teaching the truth of who Christ is.
Yeah.
Therefore, they are not teaching love.
Yeah.
They cannot teach love because he is the definition of love, and what he's done is the definition of love.
Right. Yeah, great. I mean, especially in this case where the false teaching just happens to be that they are teaching against Christ, against Jesus as the Christ. He's saying, you don't know anything if you don't know that Jesus is the Christ. You don't know what love is. You don't know what life is. You don't know what light is if you don't know that he's the Christ. Yeah. Bronco.
But it's also applied in the Bible. When you look at Genesis, and as the thread of the Bible goes on, you see this conflict that happens.
Yeah.
What is true and what is false. It's just continued. Again, during the time of Israel, you see that some prophets come and there will be false prophets. During the time of Christ, you see people destroying what truth is.
Yeah.
And so I see it as a warning for those who are listening to the message to decide what is going to be true for you. What you want to pursue.
Yeah. Yeah, there's a clear choice that's being presented here and he hits all of these opposite ideas over and over again and this is kind of the big picture of that choice, I think, of you're either choosing truth and love or you're choosing lies and death. Any other thoughts on that? Just wanted to point that out as kind of a big picture thing that we should keep an eye out for in this letter. All right, moving on then. So this next couple of verses here, in contrast to that hatred that he talks about in verse 15, then he's going to show us this greatest example of love and what that really looks like. And I love the way he puts it there. And he says, by this we know love. He's going to use it again here in a minute, but it indicates such a strong idea that the only way we can even define what love is because of him. By this we know. He's the only reason that we even know what it is. So it's just such a beautiful thought to consider what we've been given through that example of Christ. He's like, this is what it really means to love. Because there's so many different thoughts about what love is. The world's definition of love is quite different than the love that we see from Christ. And then in contrast to that previous hatred and murder, he says, look at the love that Christ had for his brothers, that he laid down his life. Like I think Micah talked about, he didn't, it's this contrast to the murder that's talked about just before. Instead, no, he lays down his life. Nobody took it from him. So that's, again, kind of this big contrast that's being made here, perfectly exemplified through Christ. Yeah.
But with that, there's this contrast also of he laid down his life for those that did not love him. So we can think about this passage as, we need to love each other, we need to love our brothers, all those things, we should sacrifice one another. I think there's a part of understanding what love is that we are to sacrifice for those that love us, but we are also to sacrifice and show love to those that hate us.
Yeah.
That's part of a real difficult aspect of Christ's love is it's not easy exactly, but it's a lot easier to sacrifice for those that sacrifice for me. It's a lot easier for me to sacrifice for those that love me. But if I'm going to follow Christ's pure example of love, whether or not you love or hate me does not dictate if I'm willing to sacrifice for you.
Yeah. Great thought. Sorry, I'm choked up.
Sorry.
Yeah, it just really got me. But no, that is such a huge difference. Again, comparing how the world loves to how Christ loves is, it doesn't matter how you feel about me. All that matters is that I love you the way Christ loved. Yeah, Michael.
Yeah, verse 12, you can kind of do an inversion there, right? Like it says, why did he murder him? Because his own deeds were evil and his brother's righteous. Why did Christ lay down his life? Because his own deeds were righteous and his brother's evil. So to Adam's point there, he loved us before we loved him.
Yeah, it's again, it's such a different way of loving that it kind of takes a little bit of a unplug from the world and how we are prone to think just by our influences around us, and thinking about the way we love very differently, the way Christ did. Other thoughts on that so far? Yeah, Josh.
Jesus also provided us with another example of this, and when he talks about sheep and the goats, when they're like, Lord, when did we? And he's like, when I was hungry, you fed me.
Yeah.
When I needed clothing, you visited me in prison. You visited me when I was sick. So Jesus provides that example as well as laying down his life. So it's like, Jesus just ultimately is like the escalation, and it's like, how can we ever achieve this bar?
Yeah.
That Jesus just raised it to the max, and we got to ever strive to be that max.
Yeah. Yeah, great tie-in. I think that fits with this teaching so well. When did you ever do this to me? Is when you did it for others. Yeah.
That's something that Adam said made me think of the words that are used in the New Testament for love, and then phileo love, brotherly love, is love that's really a response, if nothing else, to something else that someone's done. It's easy to be similar,
right,
or similar to you.
You kind of tend to reflect whatever.
But agape love is that love that is a sacrificial love that you'll do no matter what. And Jesus' example of that on the cross when he says, Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do. It's that love that I've heard it once said that we could love all the ways up to agape love without having any introduction to God at all. It's human nature to have that type of love. It's not human nature to have agape love. If it weren't for the story of Christ, defining what that looks like, we would not even know what that is. It's loving because that's who you are.
Yeah.
You love because you love. Not expecting anything in return.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, it's by the world standards, it doesn't make any sense. There's no, or just by human nature even, it doesn't really make sense to be like, yeah, I'm going to set aside my needs and put yours first. I'm going to sacrifice my own well-being for yours. And by all indications of nature and survival and evolution, that makes no sense at all. Yeah.
If I can just add to that, I think that the way this shows up in life for me is when someone loves someone because they want what's best for them, even if they don't want it. We had this happen recently when we had Ashley, who came through this congregation and got acquainted with some of the women here, and she was struck immediately by the fact that people wanted to help her, and her only question at first was, why are you doing this for me? What's in it for you?
Yeah.
She'd never experienced in her life anybody ever giving her something or helping her without wanting something in return. And it was beyond her comprehension. And so that's the love of God.
Yeah, it is. It's beyond comprehension. Which is a beautiful thing. And then I love in, verse 18, where he says, let us not love in word or talk, but in deed and in truth. There's this idea of abiding in his love, or God's love abiding in us. And we do that through action. And I love that idea that he emphasizes this is what love is. It's not talk. It's not just words, but it's deeds and it's truth. And I kind of chewed on that for a while to consider how that fits. But we're running out of time. How does this idea of love fit with how God shows his love? When he talks about deeds and truth, how does that fit with how God shows his love? John?
Throughout the entire of the Gospels, from Matthew through John, you can see Jesus loving people who are the complete outcasts of society and showing them love and kindness, and then they go and show love and kindness to others. And then it just spreads throughout the whole thing. You can just see that example after example. Even when Jesus says, let the children come to me, and then they will grow up and love others too. So it's just beautiful.
Okay. Yeah, so he shows his love to all these people, but how does he show it? Maybe is the question. More so.
I was thinking of the Old Testament when people outside the family of Israel chose to believe in God. God did not close his heart towards them. He allowed them to be with the children of Israel. Yes, they had many different roles, but they were allowed in. And he cared for other nations that wanted to follow him. And so his heart was not closed.
Yeah. Yeah, it's he doesn't just say it. He doesn't just tell us that he loves us. He demonstrates it through taking care of his children, through providing for them. He shows it through his actions, is all I was thinking there. He gives us peace, he gives us safety and confidence, and then also that aspect of truth. He also shows his love in giving us the truth, whether we like it or not. This is what is true and right, and this is what is best for you, whether you like it or not. And so those aspects of love are, again, just so very different than what the world's definition of love is. Love is acceptance, love is tolerance, and love is, just accepting everything about a person, no matter how destructive it is or how false it is. It could be an outright lie that they're living, but to love them is to accept all of that, which is wrong.
I think to further what you're saying, it's often what we would call tough love, or the examples of God growing people in the Bible through difficult times, and what that says about the way He loves. And He's willing to watch something that He loves, that He created, suffer because He knows what's best for them.
Yeah. Yeah, it is. It is. Tough love is a great definition. Yeah. All right, we'll touch on just the end of chapter 3 next week and then move on. Thanks, guys.